Check, check. Hey, welcome everybody to your last presentation of the day. So close, yet so far away. Hopefully some of you are still awake, or at least awake eating popcorn. For those who are not awake, hopefully I'll wake you up, because this is an interesting topic, from my perspective, obviously. And hopefully it is interesting for you too, and you'll get to learn something from here. So my name is Wasim Hanna. And we're going to be talking about BFFs, Angular and .NET Core. I'm sure you came because of the title. Hopefully, you'll stay for the content. Just housekeeping items here. Since there's other theaters that are not live, they can't ask questions, feel free to go into Slack, and we're in the Thanos. So you can post your questions there. And I'll either follow up with you after, or you can come over here and we can talk offline. I also have some business cards, so if we need to talk offline after today, we can do that too and follow up together. All right, so a little introduction about myself. Like I said, my name is Wasim Hanna. I've been a developer and consultant over 10 years, mostly focusing on Microsoft technologies, but obviously I've been doing more since I'm going to be talking about some Angular here. My most recent job is I'm a principal consultant at Cardinal Solutions. If you're not familiar with Cardinal Solutions, it is totally different than Cardinal Health. Cardinal Solutions is a consulting firm based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. We have 7 branches, and we're opening an 8th one in this coming months. Our offices are mostly in the Midwest and the East region, but we have clients all over the US, from California all the way to New York. Feel free to join Cardinal Solutions, to visit cardinalsolutions.com, or like I said, come talk to me after this presentation. We're Microsoft Gulp Partner of the Year. Finally, some swag. Everything that we're going to talk about during this presentation, I actually uploaded up to GitHub under my handler, WFHanna1/Angular Core. So you get some free swag for attending my presentation here today. All right, so let's talk about how this all came together. Let me adjust this a little bit. All right, so how did this all come together? So for those who are familiar with consulting, there's what's called a bench. So basically, when you're in between assignments. And Cardinal has a paid bench. So basically, if you're on a project or you're on a bench, you still get paid your salary. So I just finished my project. I was going to go sit on the bench, relax, de-stress, maybe take some time off. Then I see the head of application development at the time. Let's call him Tony Stark. Walks over. I'm like, oh man, what the heck does Tony want from me now? Maybe he's coming for somebody else, but let's see. We have the open space methodology, so he could be coming to the guy next to me, right? He kept getting closer and closer, and I'm like, all right, I guess I screwed up my last project, or something's going on. He's like, Wasim, we need to talk. You guys all know how that all starts, right? When anybody says we need to talk, that never goes well. I'm like, okay, let's do it. He's like, Wasim, we want to build a skills matrix. I'm like, oh man, you dropped my heart. Now, okay, I can recover now. He's like, we want to build a skills matrix. We have 7 branches right now. Each branch is using their own tool, and they have their different skills and categories, and we need to standardize. So that way, when our CEO and CIO wants to look at that data and see what the company's doing, where are we ranked, and so on, they can just go to a centralized place and do that. I'm like, okay, easy enough. But he said, I have a few requirements for this. All right, lay them on me, Mr. Tony. So he said, I want a website using ASP.NET and C#. Like I said at the beginning, mostly Microsoft, bread and butter for me. I'm good to go. He's like, all right, but I really don't like Razor. I really prefer if you use Angular instead. I'm like, okay, we've done that before for other projects where it's full .NET framework. You can fit Angular within ASP.NET and make it work. But I want you to use Azure AD because that's where our security is. So I don't want you to create another security set and keep track of all the people there. So I want you to just use Azure AD. Okay? Responsive? That's legitimate. so people can pull up from their phones if they're on a client site or something, and your team lead or your manager tell you, hey, you need to fill out your skill set. They can do that. They don't have really much of an excuse. Then the final one. Develop from any machine, Mac or PC. That, at the beginning, I was like, oh man, Mr. Tony, why did you do that? The first 4 were easy. We did this before. Now we're going to make it work on a Mac. All right, he's like, yeah, because we have some people in our UX practice who are front-end designers, and we have front-end developers. And we would like to have those help us with Angular as well. I'm like, OK. So I did some research online, looked at the different templates. And I know Visual Studio now have a pre-canned Angular .NET Core template. But it didn't fit all the requirements that we needed and didn't follow best practices. So what did we do? So let's look at our approach here. So the approach that I came up with is a flexible solution that meets all our requirements. And in order to do that, I ended up doing a custom-built app. So I did some research and got some pieces from here, some pieces from here, and put them all together. And that's what we're going to talk about today, how we put all these pieces together to get a working solution. All right, so just to level set to make sure we're all on the same page, and let's go through some prereqs of what you need to have on your machine or knowledge to be able to accomplish this task. All right, so first off, a working knowledge of ASP.NET. I'm not going to dive into a lot of these technologies. I'll give you a little high brief or a brief note on what they are and an explanation. This is a little bit more of an advanced talk, but again, I'll try to cover at a high level to get us through the talk. I highly advise if you're going to do this on your own to reach out to me or look more into the technologies we're going to talk about. So working knowledge of ASP.NET, working knowledge of .NET Core, and if you're not familiar with those, that's fine. We'll define those in a few minutes here. And a working knowledge of Angular, preferably greater than version 2.0 since they drastically changed from version 1 to 2. And they just released 6 yesterday. All right, you got to use some tool to develop. My tool of choice at this point was Visual Studio, which they released a version for Mac. So you can have for Windows or Mac. There's a community edition if you don't want to pay for that, or if you're small enough, you just want to try it on your own. There's community edition, up to 5 users. You can download that and just do whatever you need to do there. .NET Core CLI, Angular CLI. And for the .NET Core CLI, if you install Visual Studio on Mac, that will come just preset with it. So you don't have to worry about that. Angular CLI, NPM or whatever dependency packaging tool that you like. Yarn is another one. Source control, I highly recommend storing your code somewhere other than just your personal machine. Git seems like a very good transition there, or a very good fit. For my purposes, we used Azure subscription. You can use any other cloud provider you want to use. But for this presentation and our solution, we have used Azure subscriptions and Azure technologies. And finally, .NET Core, greater than version 1.0. They're on 2.0 right now. It's stable. And that's what this presentation is based on. And finally, Angular greater than 4. This presentation based on 5. There's some break-in changes in 6, but we can talk about those offline. All right, so 10,000-foot level view of our technology stack. First off, we're going to use ASP.NET to host all our websites and web services. .NET Core, the framework for running on a Mac and PC. Angular to handle all our HTML and front-end development. SQL Server to store all our data. And we use Azure SQL Server, but I wanted to point it out here because you can do just SQL Server on-prem. Then Azure, and under that Azure tree, we have a few things here. So Azure AD, like we mentioned, Tony came to me and said, we host everything in Azure AD, so let's just continue using that. Azure App Services, for those who are not familiar, that's what's called a PaaS, Platform as a Service, meaning you don't have to run a virtual machine, you don't have to do anything, you just hit deploy and publish to Azure, and it'll do everything for you there. So you don't have to maintain anything, you don't have to do Windows updates or all that fun stuff that we all have to deal with. Or you don't even have to configure IIS. Then Azure App Registration. For those who are not familiar, Azure App Registration basically is a connector between your Azure AD and your Azure App Services. It says this website is authorized to connect to our AD and pull back this user information. We used very default information, nothing that required a permission from Azure admin. So just people's first name, last name, emails, stuff like that, so you can store them and know who's logged in. Then finally, Azure App Insight, which we use for our login and any exception handling. All right, so let's do a quick brief on what is ASP.NET. And I found the best way to describe that is, rather than me describing it, let's go to the inventors and creators of ASP and see what they say about it. So if you go to the Microsoft site, you'll see they say ASP.NET is a unified web development model that includes the services necessary for you to build enterprise-class web applications within a minimum of coding. This hits on a couple key points here. First off, it is a framework, or it builds on top of a framework, and it gives us an enterprise-class web application. So even though Tony asked me to build an internal application, we still treated that as an enterprise-level application. So Cardinal, and during my history, I've been always working on enterprise-level applications, so we continue with that same pattern. And it's a minimum of coding. And we'll see that a little bit down the presentation, that you can do a pre-canned. You just hit a couple of buttons, hit create, and we'll have an application for you up and running. All right, so let's talk about .NET Core. My Mac has a mind of its own sometimes. So .NET Core. So for those who've been in the Microsoft world before, you're probably familiar with what's called .NET Framework, which is the old behemoths that used to run only on Windows. And if you created any code there, you cannot ever run it on a Mac unless you're on a virtual machine. Well, in the new Microsoft world, they said, let's change that up. So what is the difference is when would you want to use .NET Core? So we'd use .NET Core if you need to have a cross-platform application, meaning you want to develop from a Mac or from a Windows machine. And remember, that was one of the requirements that Tony came to me. He said, we want our UX practice to help us out here, right? Because they're the ones who really, really do this in and out, and they can make this stuff look really pretty, really quick. High performance. Who doesn't want that in their application? Scalable, also, who doesn't want that in the application? And finally, a little bit of future-proofing. You can just take your .NET Core app and have it in a container without really doing much there. All right, finally, we're going to talk about Angular CLI and what the heck does CLI mean. So again, I went to Google. Hey, Google, help me. You created Angular. What is Angular CLI? So CLI stands for Command Line Interface. So basically, it's a tool in your command prompt that can help you do some stuff. Especially one of the commands is ng new. And what that does is the Angular CLI makes it easy to create an application that already works right out of the box. It already follows our best practices. So kind of the same way ASP.NET gives you a pre-canned solution on a website, Angular CLI does the same thing, and it gives you best practices. Before I move forward, any questions so far? OK. So let's look at an architecture of how all these different tech stack components come in together. So at the very top here, there you go. So at the very top, you have your browser, that being on your phone or computer, iPad, tablet, anything you have. From there, you will type whatever URL you're going to, so skillsmatrix.com. you'll be challenged with an Azure AD authentication saying, hey, please log in so that way we can know that you truly are an employee of Cardinal Solutions. If you have successfully logged in, we will take you to an application that is ASP.NET hosted with Angular inside it. So you'll see the Angular, and there's a shell of ASP.NET around that. And the rest of this presentation will talk how to put these two together and make them best friends. Also, we're using App Insights for any crashes, so we don't have to write any logging anymore in our application, which is one of the cool things about Azure and about being in the cloud is I don't have to do log4j. I don't have to do anything. Everything's logged out to my App Insights. I get an email when a crash happens or when there's an exception. I can go check out there. And finally, save everything in our SQL Server. All right, so let's dig through this and walk through it and see how we can put this solution together. So if you open up, and all this demonstration was done on a Mac to show how this is possibly on a Mac using .NET Core. So you're going to open up your Visual Studio on a Mac. You're going to go say create new project. You're going to select .NET Core, and you select an app. You'll be given a few selections here. So you can do a console application. Kind of defeats the purpose because we want a website. Then you can go through the ASP.NET Core, and there's 4 different options for you. The very first one, self-explanatory, just an empty solution. That's not what I want, right? I wanted a pre-canned solution. The next one gives me an MVC application with web pages and endpoint services, web services, which was called web APIs. The next 2 do either or, which is not what I wanted. Tony wanted me to host all our web services inside the same application, so that way I only have to write my security against Azure AD once. So I write it once, I secure Angular and ASP.NET and my web services. Seems like a good approach. So I've selected the one that's highlighted there in blue. I hit next. It will ask you to put in a project name. For this one, I call the start track. Then the solution name will copy whatever project name you have. A location on your hard drive, you want to put that in. And again, I highly, highly recommend using some kind of source control. Out of the box, Visual Studio supports Git. All right, we'll say create. So create to a folder and a file for me. What the heck? Well, a solution file, for those who are familiar with Visual Studio for Mac, does this, for Windows, it does the same exact thing on a Mac. For those who are not familiar, a solution file, you can think of it as a container there that you can have 5, 6 different projects in your solution. And you click that solution, goes, grabs all these different projects, and put them in one IDE for you. It's actually pretty slick. Let's dig into that Stir Trek folder there and see what's going on. So again, all that code again is up on GitHub, if you want to pull that down. Let's go through that structure and see what it gave us out of the box. Good old days, good old .NET framework, you had what's called web.config. If you look for that, that doesn't exist out of the box. It still does exist, but you don't use it as much or for the same purposes. So now we are going to JSON. So all your configurations are run in JSON, and they're called app settings. You can see there's 2 of them though here. There's app settings.development, and there's straight up app settings. The same methodology and platform as before. You put all your major ones in app settings. Then if there's different variables or different key configurations for your development server, you can put that in the development. And you only put the differences there. You can do the same for prod, QA, however many environments you're running into. Then you have your bin folder right there. Okay. You have your bin folder right there, which will have all your pre-compiled, you'll have all your DLLs in there. So when you go hit build, that's where all your DLLs are going to go. Hand in hand goes the object folder, a few lines down, which is another one for all your compiled code. Out of the box, Visual Studio still gives you Bower. So there's a bower.json, which will have all the configurations there. You can choose not to use it if you want to. For this, I just use whatever out of the box. So whatever left in there, I kept it there. Bundle.config or bundle.config.json, which basically, here's all the JavaScripts that I'm going to need to run. Here's all my bootstraps. Here's all my jQueries. Modify that so when you serve it up to the browser, they don't take up a huge space and your page loads faster. So you go in there and configure them. Controllers. So I keep saying ASP.NET MVC. So MVC stands for Model View Controller, which is a pattern that is being used here. So your views should only contain your HTML for the most part. There might be some logic in there, slight logic. But for the majority of it, should be just HTML and the content you're serving up to the user. Your controls would hold your logic, or at least delegate that logic to something else, to your managers or to helpers that you would use from there. Then your models is basically what your data is going to look like. What is your data structure? And that's what these three folders represent. So controllers would live in there. Best practices is to use the control as an orchestration. So you would go there, then you would call a manager, then you get results back, verify it if you need to, then serve it up to the user. Models, again, just based on your database. Objects we already talked about, and views is all your HTML. All right, so with .NET Core, Microsoft did something slightly different. When you start off your application, you're actually spinning a console app on your machine in this program.cs. And that program.cs spins up a local host, spins up a web server on your machine. So that way, they can detect what kind of machine you're running on and either run an IIS Express or whatever you need to run on a Mac. And you can go in and modify that. But out of the box, it just works. And that program.cs calls up startup.cs. And we'll visit startup.cs because we're going to make some updates to them down the road. But that's where you house all your startup configurations, anything that you need to do before the app actually boots up or before you start serving any content to the end users. So imagine security, right? Any dependency injection you're going to be doing there. Properties, which usually host your publishing profile. So if you're, like I said, publishing to Azure, right, you would host your publish profile there, unless you have a CI pipeline, continuous integration, put in place, which I highly recommend as well. Startup.cs, then the actual project. So remember how solutions can pull in multiple projects? That's what we're talking about here. So you would have CS, C# project. Then views, then root, which is a new addition to .NET Core. So root would host what's called static files. Think about this as any JavaScript file that you would need to serve up, Bootstrap, jQuery, so on. And this will play a key role in this presentation. Any questions about ASP.NET? All right, we're good. Hopefully some of you are still awake. All right, let's talk about Angular CLI and see how that's helpful. So unlike ASP.NET, Angular doesn't have a GUI that I'm aware of, at least. But it does provide us a command prompt. So let's look at this guy. So if you go in and run, again, npm or yarn, it's up to you. You'll go say npm install -g at angular.cli. What on earth does that even mean? If I'm starting up with Angular, I have no clue what you just said. So npm, like we mentioned before, is based on Node.js, so you can just download that from Node.js website, and it will download dependencies for you. So it's kind of like a NuGet package, NuGet downloader there. So install, self-explanatory there. The -g is a flag to say, install this globally. So basically, any folder in the system I go to, I should have access to Angular CLI, or I should know what Angular CLI is. Then download Angular CLI for me. All right, we downloaded Angular CLI. What the heck are we going to do with it? Well, we want to create a new app, right? That's what Google said. Google said on their website is, Angular CLI will pre-build a website for you following best practices. Well, how do we create a new website for me? So ng is basically a command for any Angular CLI you're going to be doing, at least for this presentation. So you say ng new, which I don't know why they cut the word create, but so ng new, basically ng Angular create a new app for me. What do you want to call this app? For the sake of this, we call it sample app. I know, very creative. So what's going to happen? We've been running, okay, I skipped that step here. We've been running all of this. We've been running all these commands that we just went through inside the solution we left in ASP.NET. Remember, we had stir track as a folder. We went into that folder. That's where you need to run all these commands. So what's going to end up happening is Angular is going to create a sample API folder for us within that solution. Remember we talked about objects, root, and bin before? So it just creates it there. If we dig into that sample app, we get a pre-canned set of files here from Angular. This is mostly configurations, especially package.json, which basically says, OK, here's all the dependencies I'm going to need to make this website work, and your TypeScript configs. You see I highlighted the source folder? That's actually where all your web pages are going to live, and your TypeScript and your HTML, all that within that. So it's a three-level hierarchy here. You have your main folder, you have the configurations and source folder, then within the source folder you have all your HTML. All right, great. Created two apps. What are we going to do now? Well, once you create something, you want to make sure it works, right? So let's build it. So to build an Angular app in your command prompt, you'll run ng build. What the heck does that look like? It looks like this. So Angular is pretty smart. It goes in, takes all your JavaScript, all your HTML, all your TypeScript, all your CSS, takes everything and modifies them and creates 5 JavaScripts for you. And remember, JavaScripts are static files. Assuming everything goes well and you actually haven't broken your Angular code, that's what you're going to see there. OK? Now what? I want to see this stuff in the website, right? I don't care you generated 5 files for me. I actually want to see it. So you're going to run what's called ng-serve. Serve up this content to the browser. And what's going to do here is going to spin up a local host for you on localhost 4200. And if you navigate to that, you'll see this. Just a very basic Angular welcome to app. All right. Let's do some integration here. So first off, we're going to mix and match files, right? What does that mean? We have a sample app folder which hosts all our Angular. Then we have all our .NET code underneath that in separate folders. Well, I don't like that anymore. So we're going to do the following. Everything that's under sample.app, copy that up a level. Means source now needs to be next to root. And you can see that source is right next to views in the first rectangle there. Then at the bottom, you can see the program CS and your configs are all next to each other. Then go ahead and delete your sample app. Why is that? That way, you have an extra virtual layer there you didn't need. Second, it will make our configurations moving forward slightly easier, so you don't have to do this, slash this, slash this, slash this. So we've been talking about this Angular CLI, and it's been out of the box. Can we change it? Heck yeah, you can. They're a little sneaky about it, but you can. Kevin doesn't even like my talk anymore. He's walking out. So Angular CLI. So it's a hidden file on Macs, but to enable that, you can do Command-Shift dot, which will temporarily show hidden files. And you'll see something called .angular-cli.json. This is true up to version 5. I believe they changed this in version 6. So there's slight tweaks you need to do if you're going to build this with version 6. All right, so what's in this CLI.json? Well, this is what it is. Basically, Where do you want to output your static files? Where do I need to start from? Where's my index page? And what kind of JavaScripts or styles or scripts you want me to pull in? Well, let's change our output directly with www. That way, .NET Core and ASP.NET knows where to go to look for these static files, right? Remember, Angular CLI generates 5 static files for us. ASP.NET knows to go look at www for any static files. So we're going to do some integration here and say, Angular, go put those code in www, .NET Core, do what you keep doing before. There's what's called views, shared, and layout. We're going to go in there, and it has your layout for ASP.NET. We're going to comment out most of that. We're going to take all any JavaScripts or bootstraps that are dependent on our applications, and we're going to move those to our Angular CLI. So that way, Angular CLI can pull those in for us too. And anything else in layout you can delete except for render body, so that way it can host its body. All right, so let's build it. You can see there's a big caution here. Little known fact about ng build, when it runs, it goes in and deletes anything that's in the output directory. So when you do that, when you run ng build, it will go in and delete anything in www. And remember, we said we're going to put all our static files in www. So if you're doing .NET Restore, all that stuff is going to go there, right, from your layout. So if you ran .NET Restore, then .NET Build, you'll sync you complete successfully. Then you go run ng build, and that's going to delete all the stuff you just downloaded. So for now, we have to go run ng build first to clean up that folder, build all the static files. Then you can go do .NET Restore and .NET Build. All right, let's see these sites in action. So we're going to do ng serve, like we talked, to serve Angular. Then we're going to do .NET Run to serve our .NET application, or you can hit from Visual Studio F5. So what does that look like? So the Angular site is going to look like that, which we just saw a few minutes ago. And our ASP.NET will look like this. 2 separate sites, right? Do we have a problem? Does anybody see a problem so far? Nobody sees a problem? Yeah, he said you have 2 sites. Exactly. I have .NET Angular CLI serving up my sites on 4200, and I have .NET Core serving up my site on 5001. Which site am I going to send my end user to? 4200 or 5001? All right, so let's look how we solve this problem. So we're going to try to bridge these 2 apps together. This seemed like the path of least resistance at that point. And what we're going to do is, remember we talked about MVC pattern, right? Model View Controller. Well, we have a default model view controller saying when you boot up the site, here's where you need to go. And that's to views, home, index, .cshtml. So we're going to go into that file, an HTML file, delete everything from there, and we're going to replace it with this TypeScript, JavaScript. And what this JavaScript is going to do is say, anytime you get hit, just redirect to index.html. If you remember from the Angular CLI config, that's where Angular app starts. All right, so we did that change. Now what? Let's test it. Again, build matters. So ng build first, .NET Restore, just for sake. Let's make sure you got everything you need, then .NET Build. Then now, we're not going to run ng serve moving forward. We don't need Angular to host this for us anymore. .NET and ASP is going to do all the hosting for us. So how? What's going to end up happening here? So now, if you look at that blue rectangle up there, we're serving from 5001, but we're pointing into index.html. And we're serving up the Angular content. Clear as mud? So now, ASP.NET is serving up the code for us, but it's serving up our Angular pages. So let's do some progress check. Remember, we had those 5 requirements. Let's see what we hit, what we missed. We have a working .NET application. We have a working Angular application. We have an integrated solution where we don't need to go to the 2 different endpoints. We just go to the 5001 and it serves it for us. Is everything complete? Not really. We're missing a couple of things here. So we're missing Angular routing, and we're missing security. This thing is not secure, right? We said, when there's that location, anybody who hit that endpoint will go there. So let's talk about some routing. Right out of the box, pre-canned, you'll get that bottom not highlighted code. And what that says is, like I was saying, the default is always to go home, index, then you can give it some ID if you need to. But basically say, go to home index. Okay, that works if I'm trying to hit a ASP.NET website, because it follows the MVC pattern. What's going to happen if I try to go to my skills matrix / whatever route I have in my Angular? Well, it's going to bomb out because it doesn't know what that is. So instead, you got to add that first part, which says, okay, if you get a URL you don't understand, hand it off to home index, which have the code, the JavaScript, to reroute to Angular, and Angular will take care of that. And the other thing, too, as well, if you don't have that first section, no matter where you're going in your Angular app, it will always say /index.html. All right, so we got our routing to work. Let's talk about some security. So you're going to need to download 4 NuGet packages: the authentication.core, the OpenID Connect, which is for Azure AD, cookies, because we're doing cookie-based authentication, and the main authentication one. Remember the app setting, that JSON that we talked about at the very beginning? Well, you need to go in and modify that and add a couple JSON objects in there. You can name them anything you want. There's no really standard here. So for us, we named authentication. We're trying to be as descriptive as possible. Then within that, just saying who the provider is, which is Azure AD. Then within that, you define, the first 2 are pre-canned, basically where you're going, which is login.microsoftonline.com, where you're going to come back after you authenticate correctly. The rest of those, obviously, for security purposes, I just left them blank. But you remember this Azure app registration we talked about at the very beginning? When you go create that, it will give you a client ID and a client secret. You take those out of there, put them into your application. Your domain, whatever your company's domain is. Then a tenant ID, which is a unique identifier within Azure for your company. All right, we created this. How helpful is this at all? Well, in startup.cs, remember we said program.cs spins up startup.cs, and startup.cs is where you put in anything that you need to put before you serve up content to the user. Security seems like a very good thing to put in here. So what we're going to do is the first line basically pulls in the configs for authentication Azure AD and make them DI ready, make them dependency injection ready. So you can use those anywhere else in your application. And maybe authentication is not a good example, but you can think of anything else that you want to pull in. If you have any values that you want to pull in into your application, some constant values in there. So I just put it in there to just show you the pattern to be able to do that. Add MVC comes out of the box. Then everything after that we have added. It's pretty straightforward, and the calls are actually pretty straightforward explaining what they're doing. So add authentication, cookie-based authentication, and let's go in and pull this stuff from the app settings. Your client ID, your client secret, your authority, which is basically saying login.microsoftonline.com/your tenant ID. So that way it knows where to go to try to authenticate you. Then pull back claims so we can see what this user is, what claims they are. And claims basically means properties. So their name, first name, last name, and their email. We are missing a key part. In our index.cshtml, we said once you get hit, go ahead and redirect. Well, we got to update that code from the top left to the bottom right. We're going to write some C# here and say, only if the user is authenticated, go ahead and do that. Otherwise, just display an empty screen to them, right? For our sake, we didn't care about that much. So what does it look like once you hit our URL? You will be given this challenge from Azure AD. And the really cool thing is, I didn't have to write any code at all to make this appear. It's all pre-canned from Azure. So you type in your username and password. If your authentication is successful, you'll be taken into the application, which ended up looking like this. So as you can see, all this is Angular based, Angular created. So skills matrix, you have 3 tabs there. Your dashboard, which you always land on. And basically, here's all the different skills and categories you have selected. Manage skills, which hosts every single category and skill that we have across the entire company. So you can go in and select what you want. And a search, so that way if a manager or the CIO or the CTO or whatever, we have a new project that has Angular. We need to go see who all has Angular and their skills 3. We can go there and get that out there. All right, so as you see, some of this is pretty complicated, and especially the builds and all that stuff. So I went ahead and added some automation using Gulp files. I'm not going to go through every single thing we added in the Gulp file. I'm going to go through some highlights here. The first one I wanted to highlight is ng-build. Remember, ng-build compiles your Angular code for you. But we had that downturn and downside of deleting everything in the www root. As you're developing and you're trying to serve up your code, that's really annoying. So, fortunately enough, there's a flag you can add, which is --delete -output -pass equal false, which means every time you build this app, don't delete the www root, just update it. So that's what we use for our development environment. You can also add what's called an Angular watch, which basically means every time I update my Angular code and save it, go ahead and kick a build for me behind the scenes. So I don't have to worry about what's going on there. Then every once in a while, I can just go to my console app, look at it, make sure that everything is compiling correctly. And also it enables you, if you're doing a bunch of changes, you can save once, to go to the browser, refresh, you can see all your changes there. All right, we added the same for .NET build. So the command is very straightforward, .NET build. And that depends on .NET restore. So every time it runs, it will go try to restore all your packages. Excuse me. Then we added a .NET run, which again goes in, runs your application with a restore and a build. But wouldn't it be cool to have a .NET watch? So you can do that. So basically, you can go and modify your project. You can add this watcher from the .NET CLI. And what it does is it will monitor any of your C# code. And once you update that, it will go in and rebuild. So why did we add these automations? We added these automations because most of the time you will be running locally, you're either working on the front end or working on the back end. So you don't have to worry about going back and rerunning stuff. So you can do .NET run and watch, just making sure everything, your web server, your endpoints are always running for your local host. And you can just modify whatever you need to modify in Angular. or the other way around. Say you're mocking some data in the backend. So you can do Angular run or Angular watcher, have that running in the front end, and you can update your data in the backend, right, and run that and go modify it. But maybe sometimes you need to modify in the something in the front end as well. So you can just modify it, save it, or rebuild your code for you. This was really helpful because you don't have to memorize all the commands. You don't have to memorize all that. You just open up 2 terminals, run those 2 commands. You don't have to worry about it. All right. So let's talk about this approach. Let's talk about the good and the bad. What is good about this approach? What I really like about this approach is a one-stop shop for everything, right? You have Azure AD securing all your code base. It's securing your front end, it's securing web services, and it's securing your Angular. It's securing Angular because we added guards in there that you have to have a consultant ID. And in order to get a consultant ID, you have to hit our web services, which are secured as well. So that way we don't have to write code for Angular to authenticate and with our Azure AD, then have to rewrite the same code again for web services and front end to authenticate with our Azure AD. It was just one shop for everything. Also for your development, you fire up Visual Studio, which has great support for Angular and TypeScript now. And you can write all your web services. You can write all your Angular in there. You can write your TypeScript, HTML. Everything is in one tool. So you don't have to get out of that tool. All right, what are some downsides to this approach? So the handoff from MVC to Angular that Windows that replaced, I'm not a fan of it, but it was the path of least resistance. So we got there. There's definitely could be improvements to that one. Having to run 2 compilers all the time if you're trying to do changes on both. Some of you can say, okay, well, you can edit your C# project and make it run Angular before every build. Well, there's downsides to that too, because if you're rerunning Angular, rebuilding Angular every time you're rebuilding your .NET, maybe you're only concerned about the backends. You really don't care what's happening in the front end. You don't want to do that. Or you could be just purely a UX person who's working on the front end. They really don't care about the backend. How am I going to run that? Right? So that's just some downsides there. And finally, if you remember from our automation, we made ng build not delete the output path, the www root, which you can slightly run into problems where you have static files or stuff is cached and it's not being reserved correctly. Next steps, go forth and create. Last time, all this code is up on my GitHub. It's free for everybody to download. WF Hanna 1/Angular core. You can download that code and go play with it. And you can basically take out anything that's Angular CLI, and you can plug in your code right in there. All right, I was going to do a live demo, but since we're kind of cutting it short on time, I'll take questions first if there are any. If not, then we can dive into.
Slack question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why you couldn't do this demo with Angular 1?
Why you couldn't do this demo with Angular 1? Don't quote me on this one. I can't believe if Angular CLI are supported for Angular 1 or not. If it is, then you can probably follow the same steps. It's basically just the handoffs from there. Was there anything else from there? No, okay. Any questions here in this theater? No? Okay. All right, so let me fire up my Visual Studio here. It's taking sweet time. All right, BFFs. So if you pull up the .NET Core from GitHub, it will be called BFFs Angular.NET Core. I'll try and maximize that so you guys can see it. Maybe. All right. So this is let me open up here the tree structure on the left. I know it's pretty small, unfortunately. But as we were talking about here, you'll see your controllers, your E2E, which is from Angular, your models, which is from C# and .NET Core, your sources, which has everything from Angular as well, and your views. Well, all the way down here, if you type S, you'll find startup.cs, which is open here on the right. Because my configs, because my app setting doesn't have anything in there, then my startup is going to blow up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my startup.cs and say, hey, take out this code here for authentication. But remember, our index under views still had our if user. So let's run this and see what happens. Let me compile my code. So let me open up a terminal here. Let me open a couple like we were mentioning. So on my first one, I'm going to say Gulp, default. Go ahead and run everything. And here I'm going to do Gulp.net run. It is case sensitive, and watch. So it's going to go in, do its merry thing. I actually don't have internet. Let's see. It completed. Because I have all the Node modules already downloaded on my machine before. This also completed. So let's go to our browser. (5001). I had a failure. Nothing like live coding, right? Well, it's failed because I never saved this file. So let me save it. It's rebuilt. And you can see if there's errors or anything, it will pop up in the console app behind you here. So we are served with nothing, which is what we expect. Let's go and modify this code slightly. So we're going to comment out the first part, uncomment the second part, which is the part that we don't have any security on there. Remember to save this time. Go back, refresh, and an error occurred. Did I not comment out the if? There you go. Again, nothing like live programming, right? What could ever go wrong? Boom. And it's HTML, but you can do whatever route you want from there, and it will show up on there. That's all I have, folks. Feel free to come down, ask me questions after. Hit the GitHub, and thank you for attending.